In the age of the internet, we have been able to share thousands of odd and spectacular stories with one another. Some are funny, others interesting. But then there are some that are downright terrifying. Thrill seekers who turn to the online web for their source of daily horror intake often find themselves browsing through the mountains of posts relating to unbelievable experiences, haunting expeditions, and mind-boggling encounters. For those living in Japan searching for that adrenaline rush back in the mid-2000s, a story emerged online, written by an anonymous author who claimed to have a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with an inexplicably dangerous creature. It drew in thousands, wondering if the online urban legend was true. Many had wanted to find out, but very few have dared to attempt to find the truth. Could the entity known as the Hasshaku-Sama truly be out there, prowling the woods, luring children to their doom, and feasting on their bones? In this brand new episode of the Moonlight Lore podcast, I, your host Jordan Hopkins, retell the story of this creature to let you come to your own conclusion on if it's real or simply a figment of internet superstition. The rural rice fields of Japan are an area of the country rarely spoken about or seen by many. It's quaint there. The small traditional villages scattered throughout the mountainous terrain where the residents live their simple, peaceful lives don't see much excitement. It's almost like life moves at a different pace, quiet and serene. However, in 2008, an anonymous young woman came forth revealing a story that may shatter the illusion of the picturesque traditional Japanese hamlets. According to this mystery woman, back in 1998, 10 years prior to sharing this story, while she was a young girl no older than 10, she had gone to one of these small communities with her family to visit her elderly grandparents, where she would go on to spend the entirety of her spring vacation. There wasn't too much to do there, so she found that one of her favorite pastimes was to explore the countryside on her own. This was never an issue for her or her grandparents, as the whole area was considered quite safe, far from any kind of danger. It was on one of her many outings she found herself growing rather tired. Each day she ventured further and further from her grandparents' home in an effort to try and find something new each time she explored. So among the rolling green pastures between the village and the nearby mountain forest, she managed to find a soft patch of grass begging for her to lie in. The sun was slowly past the halfway point in the sky, and she figured a small rest would be beneficial to her having the energy to continue on her adventure. And so without much convincing, she stretched out her body, becoming one with the vegetation surrounding her, and absorbed the warmth of the afternoon sun. The tranquil sounds of the mountain breeze drifted through the dark forest, in between the long blades of emerald grass, and into the ears of the young girl. But almost immediately she felt something was off about the wind, almost as if there was a whisper hidden in the soft natural notes. At the time she had been slowly drifting off, ready and eager for an afternoon nap to overtake her. But the unexplainable noises shook her to full consciousness. Po, 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 over and over. It was an odd sound to hear dancing with the wind, especially out where she was. There was no machinery nearby, and as she sat up from her nest, she looked around and knew the sounds couldn't have been coming from the direction of the small farms, but rather was coming from behind her, back towards the dark woods. It was peculiar, but not entirely unsettling. It was strange, that was it. A sound from a source she couldn't recognize. It eventually stopped, so thinking nothing of it anymore, she fell back into position on the grass, ready to finally take her nap. But no sooner that she had fallen down did the mysterious noise start up again. Only this time it was more urgent and was getting louder with each passing second. Po-po, po-po, po-po. It was more rapid now, getting closer. The girl sat up again, but this time looked back towards the forest behind her and spotted something strange. A pale, wide-brimmed hat was peeking over a hedge, its owner remaining hidden behind the thick shrub. Then it moved. The hedge was large, and the owner of the hat walked along the other side until they found a small opening that offered up a view to the young girl. It was a woman, wearing an equally pale dress matching her large hat. She smiled softly, almost welcoming, tempting the young girl to approach. This was certainly a strange sight indeed. A woman in a clean white dress and hat, waltzing through the forest. But even stranger, noted the girl, was that the opening the woman was staring at her from was 6 feet off the ground. Before the girl could comprehend what she was staring at, the mysterious woman vanished behind the foliage and seemingly walked back into the woods. The whole situation undoubtedly creeped our young witness out and forced her to end her daily outage early, instead causing her to hurriedly rush back to her grandparents' house to tell her grandmother what she had seen. Bursting through the front door, her elders, shocked by her sudden entrance, listened intently as she eagerly told them about her adventure and what she had saw in the woods not far from the farm. Every day she would tell them about what she had seen or where she had gone while out on her walks, but this time, as she described the tall, pale, smiling woman in the woods, their interest in her story was quickly replaced with immediate concern and horror. Her grandmother, visibly panicked now, excused herself quickly to make some tea for the three, while her grandfather leaned forward in his chair, his absent mind now focused on what his granddaughter was speaking of. Strangely, in the middle of describing her story, the old man stood up, peered outside the window into the setting sun, then excused himself to another room to make a quick call. The girl's grandmother returned carrying some hot tea, if only for the sole purpose of helping calm herself rather than the confused girl listening to her grandfather in the other room. His voice was muffled, but she could hear the frantic conversation as he talked to a person on the other side of the phone he called Mrs. K. The girl was supposed to leave for home tonight back to the city, but now that she had heard the conversation, she learned she would need to remain until the next day. Before hearing why exactly she needed to stay, the grandmother finally found her voice, as trembling as it might be. With a reserved sigh, she quietly began to explain why they were acting the way they were. What the young girl had witnessed while out in that field, what she had seen lurking in the forest, was not a woman like it had appeared to be, but was something else entirely, something sinister and menacing. It was a monster or a demon that had disguised itself to appeal to her. It was called the Hasshaku-Sama, or Miss 8 Shaku, a creature 8 feet tall that exclusively preyed on young children. It had plagued the village for years, hiding in the dark woods, only showing itself when it hungered for flesh. Sometimes it would take on the appearance of a young woman, or an old one, depending on what it believed may draw their potential victims closer. Her goal is to appear as someone warm and welcoming, someone who the victim may know and feel safe around. The grandmother went on to explain that the Hasshaku-Sama was supposed to be trapped in a nearby shrine dedicated to the guardian spirit Jesus Bosatsu, located not far from the village. He was supposed to protect travelers and children, so his shrines in the area were perfect vessels to trap the demonic spirit in. For over a dozen years, the Hasshaku-Sama had remained confined to its stone prison, but now it had finally escaped. And now that it was out, and seemed to have taken an interest in the young girl, it would stop at nothing to follow and observe. It will wait for the perfect moment to lure her away from her family under the guise of safety by mimicking someone she knew. Then it would ruthlessly kill her and feast on her flesh and bones deep in the woods. The evening passed by without much commotion, as the two grandparents attempted to comfort the girl, trying their best to appear calm, in an effort not to worry her further. But their nervous demeanor and their constant peering out the window did little to assure the girl that she was safe. Suddenly, a knock at the door. It was slow and heavy, but enough to send shivers down their spine. The grandfather went to go see who it was, despite her pleas not to allow the monster inside. The reality of what her elders had told her was finally catching up with her. As the old man slowly cracked the door open and looked outside, he spoke softly to someone before opening the door wider, allowing whoever it was on the front step to freely walk in. It was a frail old woman with a pleasant look on her face. She shuffled slowly through the wooden entrance and smiled when her eyes fell on the nervous child in the living room. Without a word, she approached, with her arms outstretched, and placed a small paper charm in her hand. The old woman, without even having introduced herself yet, told her to have it on her at all times. It will help ward off the demon and keep her safe. The girl thanked her and excused herself to her bedroom while the adults continued to discuss matters in the doorway. When she walked into her room, she was surprised to have found that while her grandfather had been talking on the phone earlier, He had been busy placing several other paper charms around the room. The window curtains were drawn, and in all four corners there was a small pile of salt that had been poured. Most notably of all, in the center was a miniature shrine dedicated to Jizo's Basatsu. She was a little confused by this whole setup, but figured her grandfather must have had a good reason to set things the way he had. She thought perhaps it was best not to question it. Flipping on the television to try and relax, she settled down into her bed to try and forget, to try and move past everything that had happened that day. Before she knew it, the adrenaline of the night had finally left her system, and slowly but surely, she drifted off into a deep slumber. Just after 1 in the morning, the young girl found herself slowly being awoken by a noise emanating from somewhere in the room. The TV was still on, playing some late-night talk show, and she had believed it had been simply that had awoken her. She reached for the remote and cut the power, but the noise persisted. Immediately, she realized the soft tapping sound wasn't coming from inside the room with her, but rather from the closed window, hidden by the thin curtains. It was hard to see, her eyes still attempting to adjust to the darkness from the flashing lights of the television. But after a minute of focusing, she believed she saw something moving behind the curtain outside. Wanting to put it out of her mind, she quickly flipped the TV back on, trying to drown out the incessant tapping against the glass. But she realized she must have turned it up too loud, because all of a sudden her grandfather's voice came whispering through the bedroom door out from the hall. He quietly asked her, "Are you still alright in there? If you're too scared, you can come out and spend time with us." Knowing her grandfather would protect her, she cautiously climbed out of bed, taking care not to make any sounds as she did. As she tiptoed across the room to the door, she reached for the handle, ready to jump into the safe embrace of her protector. But that's when a thought rushed into her mind. Her grandparents always went to bed before her, and they rarely ever got up after they did. A warning then followed that thought. She distinctively remembered her grandmother telling her the creature would mimic her loved ones as a ploy to let her guard down, to lure her out of safety. Suddenly, the terrifying revelation was broken by her grandfather's voice. "Come outside, dear. It's okay, I'm waiting for you." Now that she had the suspicion this voice wasn't coming from her grandfather, she could now tell it was slightly off. It was different. A shadow crossed over the light, sneaking under the wooden door, forcing the girl to recoil from it, pushing her back towards her bed. She looked over at one of the piles of salt that was placed in one of the four corners of the room, and despite it being already hidden in darkness, she could tell the white crystals were turning a deep black. She jumped towards the old shrine that was placed in the middle of her room and wrapped her hands around it, praying that daylight would come and that she would be safe from this monster. As tears began streaming down her cheeks, the tapping on the window became more agitated, before finally turning into hard, open-handed slaps against the glass despite her window being on the second floor. Po-po, 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 po-po. The sounds of the creature's laughter grew, filling the room, attempting to drown out the endless praying from the girl. For the entire night, the voices of those who she loved, her grandparents, her parents, her friends, begged and pleaded for the girl to step out of her room, to come outside. It was safe and the monster was gone. Lies. All of it was lies. The girl knew her grandparents wouldn't allow her to leave the house at night after what she had told them earlier, and her parents and friends were back home in the city. Po-po, po-po-po, po-po-po, po-po-po. The insidious laughter grew with each passing hour, as the creature outside believed it was close to cracking its prey into panicking. But in the face of all this torment, the girl stayed strong, continuing to pray to Jizo Basatsu. When finally, the musical notes of the songbirds outside drew the morning sun from its resting place. As the shadows melted away, the tapping outside stopped. The house went quiet. In all four corners of the room, each pile of salt had turned black, almost as if their warding properties were about to give in and allow the demon the chance to strike. But they had held out long enough. She held out long enough. When the familiar footsteps of her grandparents echoed throughout the house, and finally when both of their faces peeked inside the room to see if she had been alright, only then did the girl finally jump to her feet and rush to the door. She quickly embraced the two of them, who were gravely concerned with the tired look in their granddaughter's eyes, and after noticing the dried tears on her cheeks and the blackened salt in the room, they knew best not to ask any questions. They knew what she had gone through that night. The only thing they had to say to her was that she wasn't safe just yet. She must leave the village soon, but only in a specific way. Mrs. K, the woman who had paid a visit to the family last night, would come for her and escort her out of the town. She, along with a small convoy of vehicles, arrived on the doorstep not an hour later. 8 men left their vehicles and gathered around the girl on the front porch of the house, shielding her from the rest of the world. Her grandparents told her to go with them. They would protect her and listen to Mrs. K, do everything she instructed. Do not listen to any other voices you might hear. Only close your eyes and plug your ears. The Hasshaku-Sama was bound to try and lure her away in a desperate final attempt, and the only way to resist her was to try to ignore her. The girl would later recall that they had hardly traveled beyond the border of the village before Mrs. K warned her things were about to become very difficult. The old woman then began chanting a phrase, words the girl did not recognize. Then all of a sudden the insidious laughter slowly started up again. Po, 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 po. It was coming from outside and getting closer. She couldn't resist the urge to just take one final peek, to see her tormentor one last time. The draw of the laughter was too much. She opened her eyes just for a moment to witness the creature running or gliding alongside the vehicle, almost as if it was stationary to the side of the car, despite the high speeds they were traveling at. The white figure with long black hair and an unnaturally long grin moved to lower its head to the window, before a man sitting in the vehicle next to the girl shouted to close her eyes. Then the familiar incessant tapping started again. From all windows of the car she heard it, constant loud tapping surrounding her, all while the thing outside continued its horrible laughter. It lasted what seemed like hours, but in reality was likely only a few minutes. Without warning, the tapping died down, and the laughter seemed to fade away. The men in the car took turns looking out the window, ensuring the creature wasn't near, before they decided it was finally safe to pull over to the side of the road. As the girl cautiously climbed out of the car, she was shocked to see none other than her father waiting for her outside, rushing over to give her a warm embrace. Unbeknownst to her, all the men and women in the convoy were relatives to her. Some she recognized and others she had never seen before. Mrs. K told her she had hoped by surrounding her with people of the same bloodline, it would confuse the Hasshaku-Sama, and in turn was hoping it would make her more difficult to track down. This was why she needed to wait in the village for one last night, so that she had time to gather all her relatives to come help, although obviously it didn't seem to have much effect. The creature had obviously been waiting for them, and followed the group of cars when they tried to escape the village. Thankfully, though, it seemed to have given up, and retreated back to the forest near town. The small paper charm the girl had been grasping in her hand during the drive, like the salt in her room, had turned a deep black. And upon seeing this, Mrs. K smiled and told her that it had done its job. But just to be safe, she handed the girl another small charm to hold on to until they made it back to the city. She thanked Mrs. K and all her relatives who helped ensure that she made it out of the village alive, and taking the hand of her father, got in his vehicle and started the long, awkward drive home. It was far more excitement than she was used to, and prayed that she would never have to deal with that kind of fear ever again. Her father explained to her how fortunate she truly was. Back during his childhood growing up in the village, one of his friends was taken by the very same creature that tried to take her, and he never saw him again. After that visit, the girl was never able to visit her grandparents' village ever again. It wasn't safe for her there anymore, so they opted to drive to see her instead. On one of their many visits to the city, her grandmother told her the village had investigated the shrines that were supposed to imprison the Hasshaku-Sama, but it was later discovered that one had been smashed to pieces, as if someone had deliberately set the creature free. Her grandfather also confirmed to her years later that he never had woken up that night when she had heard the voice sneaking through the bedroom, ensuring her to come out and that it was safe. The creature must have found its way inside the home and tried to lure her. It was good she realized that in the moment, others may not have been that astute. All in all, though, after that night she never did encounter the creature ever again. Although her grandfather died several years ago and she was forbidden from attending his funeral because it had taken place at his old village, she still hopes to return one day when she's older, so that she may pay her proper respects to the man who helped protect her against the demon. Ever since the story broke on the internet back in 2008, the urban legend seemed to have taken on a life of its own, with several other people coming forth claiming to have their own strange experiences with the creatures resembling the Hasshaku-Sama. Not before long, the widespread popularity of the legend made its way across Japan, finding its way into comic books, video games, YouTube videos, and thrilling campfire stories. Interestingly enough, it was around this same time, just a year before actually, when the Slender Man phenomenon took hold of North America, and then the rest of the world in 2009. It may just be coincidence that these internet cryptids share similar features and similar motives, but like Slender Man, the Hasshaku-Sama is likely nothing more than just an urban legend born out of an age of the internet when scary stories were greatly sought after by thousands. Although, like many urban legends around the world, it does make one wonder if there really is a kernel of truth to it. The author of the post never did address their identity or region where the story takes place, perhaps in an attempt to remain anonymous, or perhaps in a way to protect others from trying to investigate it further. We may never know. What we do know is that the Hasshaku-Sama has become somewhat of a horror icon, and will remain forever as another internet cryptid born for the sole purpose of haunting our dreams. I want to thank all of you for listening to this horrifying urban legend. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it despite it being a rather shorter episode than normal. By the time you're listening to this, I'll be deep into Canadian Thanksgiving, and then I'll be gearing up to go on vacation in both Ireland and Scotland for about 2 weeks, so this will unfortunately be the last episode you hear from the podcast until Halloween. In the meantime, while you wait for the 31st to arrive, it would be fantastic if you guys could leave a 5-star review for the show. As I always say, it only takes a second to do, and goes a tremendous way in helping the show grow. Also, since it is the spooky season after all, you may want to share the show with some friends and family who you think might want to hear some scary stories to put them in the mood. By sharing it via social media or by word of mouth, it would go a long way in helping draw in new listeners. And finally, if you have it in your hearts to go a step further, I would absolutely love it if you guys could help support the Patreon. I have a few of you on there right now, and I'm deeply grateful for your support in the show. All donations go towards helping the show grow and become better at the same time. It allows me to afford new equipment, but most importantly, it also helps me manage the costs of what comes in running the podcast. In exchange for your help, I release monthly bonus episodes on there for you guys. I also give shoutouts on here for those who do donate, and you get to listen to the episodes before everybody else. So if you can manage, it's only $5 a month for the lowest tier, so I hope you'll consider helping out. But at any rate, hopefully all of your October goes well for all of you. Again, sorry for not being around to produce more content during the best month of the year, but sometimes you just gotta take a little break, I guess. It's just coincidence that my trip and the Canadian Thanksgiving are back to back, so instead of the normal 2 weeks that you have to wait for a new episode, it'll just have to be 3. It's not that bad, but of course, I do still feel a little guilty for not getting you guys something to listen to, but hopefully you can forgive me. If you follow the show's Instagram page, you'll be able to see a bunch of pictures and videos of my vacation, so if you're interested, do go and give the podcast a follow on Instagram. But yeah, I believe that's it for me. The next time you hear from me, I suppose, will be on Halloween. So as always, during this month, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and take it easy. Not enough people do that nowadays. Anyways, I'll see you all at the end of the month. See ya.